Today, the borough of Emmaus is a thriving suburb located west of the city of Allentown. During the early 1700s, on land acquired from William Penn, German immigrants began settling and farming in what would later be known as the Lehigh Valley. 300 years ago, the area, which would become Emmaus, was a wilderness with only a few settlers living among the Native Americans, the Lenni Lenape Indians. The German immigrants, when leaving the port of Philadelphia, traveled on foot, following the Indian trails that had been made over many hundreds of years. The Lenape people would travel by way of the trail along the north side of South Mountain to the Jasper quarries located near what today is known as the village of Veracruz. Jasper is a reddish-colored stone that would have been hand-chipped into a shape and was used to make arrowheads and spear points. It was an important item that was traded to other tribes. The new German immigrants would follow these Indian trails over South Mountain. When these early settlers arrived on the north side of the mountain, they found a location that was level, and most important, it had a source of water, several freshwater mountain springs. And with the abundant supply of old-growth hardwood trees, they could build their shelter, a log cabin that would later be known as the shelter house.
Some colonists came to this area out of curiosity. They wanted to see for themselves what they had heard about this area in the wilderness west of the river. Some came to start farms and homesteads. Still others came to trade with the Native Americans. These native tribes had furs such as deer, fox, and beaver that were in great demand in Europe. Now the colonial traders had steel and iron tools such as knives and axes, which were a big improvement over native stone tools. Brass pots, metal pots, jewelry, and blankets were also traded. Now with any trip, the colonists needed to be prepared for a long and dangerous journey. Because in the 1700s, Pennsylvania still had mountain lions and wolves, and they had to be protected from that. They also needed to possibly be protected from other people. Now I'm holding a typical firearm of the period. This is a Pennsylvania long rifle. It's a muzzle-loading, single-shot, flintlock rifle. Now that means powder from a powder horn has to be poured down the barrel. A round lead ball about a ½ inch in diameter is placed on the barrel, and then everything is rammed down with a ramrod. The pan is open and priming powder is put into the pan. It's closed. When the hammer is drawn to full cock and the trigger is pulled, the flint and the jaws of the hammer hit the steel and create sparks. Those sparks ignite the priming powder. It sends a flame through the barrel, through a little hole in the barrel, and the main powder charge propels the bullet out the end. Now, a good rifleman could get maybe 2 or 3 shots off a minute. This whole procedure had to be repeated for each shot. Backwoodsmen also carried a tomahawk and hunting knife for added protection.
Colonists would have hunted, fished, and gathered plants for food. To cook their food, they would have started their fire by using flint and steel to produce the spark. For a split second, that spark was around 800 degrees. The spark was caught in a piece of charred cloth made by charring cotton cloth.
Once an area for a homestead had been selected, a temporary shelter was built. It would have been either a tent or a lean-to made out of local materials. They would have stayed in this structure as they built their log cabin. Pine, oak, chestnut, and poplar trees were used for the walls of the cabin. On average, there was 10 to 12 logs, depending upon the diameter of the log in each wall. On average, 40 to 50 trees would have been used for each cabin. Now, the dimensions of the cabin were usually 12 by 14 feet wide and 18 to 22 feet long. Now, a colonist would probably bring along or be accompanied by other family members or friends to the building site. 2 or 3 men could erect a cabin in 3 or 4 weeks. A horse or ox was brought along also to carry the tools and supplies and to haul logs from the forest. Now, once the trees were down, the bark was usually removed to prevent insect damage. An axe and an adze were used to trim or hewn or square the logs so they would shed rain, which could collect between the logs and cause rot. The ends were notched so the logs would lock together. There were no nails or spikes used in the construction. 2 common notches were the crown, V-notch, and the dovetail. The spaces between the logs were filled with moss, rocks, and horsehair mixed with mud and clay. Now, once the roof rafters were up, wooden shingles were cut using a froe and mallet out of short logs. These early colonists were very successful in building a life for themselves in the wilderness. From these early settlers, villages and towns such as Emmaus developed and prospered.
In 1734, the cabin was originally constructed as a 2-room, 1-floor structure without a cellar. The narrow kitchen area contained a large stone wood-burning fireplace. In 1741, after a major addition was constructed on the west side, the kitchen would be located in the middle of the cabin. The placement of the kitchen is what distinguished the shelter house as a German design. Another common design was the Swedish cabin, in which the fireplace was placed on a side wall. A stack of firewood would have to be kept nearby to keep the fire going for cooking, and in the winter months it would also supply some heat to the cabin. A hole in the back wall of the fireplace provided the opening to shovel hot coals into what was known as a jam stove. The jam stove was an early form of space heater located in the main room of the cabin. It was made of 5 cast iron plates bolted together to form a box approximately 20 inches high, 20 inches wide, and 24 inches front to back. A large room next to the kitchen was the main living area and used for family gatherings at meal times. The room not only was used for serving meals, one side was the sleeping area. Originally, the windows were very small and in winter covered with scraped animal skins. Window glass was expensive and not available at this time. Typical of early colonial homes, the outhouse was located away and downhill from the main living area. The shelter house outhouse was, until early 1950, located about 150 feet to the northwest side in the woods. At night, instead of having to go out in the dark, especially if it was cold, one could use what was called the chamber pot. This was kept under the bed and would have been shared by other members in the family. The next morning, it would have been one of the children's chores to empty the contents over in the outhouse. Not only did the man of the house construct the log cabin, he also made the furniture, the tables, chairs, benches, cabinets, and the beds. It was common for a family to have 4 or more children, sometimes as many as 8 or 10. Children were needed to help with the chores around the homestead. Construction of addition on the west side of the original cabin, plus a second floor over the sections, was completed in 1741. This second floor and the west side addition provided more sleeping area for the family and also for the occasional travelers. The needs of these early settlers were accomplished by their own abilities. They had to grow their own crops, weave their own fabric in order to make their clothing. If they were fortunate to own livestock, be it chicken, cow, or pig, and possibly a horse, they had to grow what they fed the animal. The wife would have a small garden outside of the cabin and grow spices and herbs. used not only for cooking but for home remedies. Trade between neighbors was a normal way of life. If a family had a spinning wheel and could turn sheared wool into thread, then that item could be traded for chicken eggs. Men would help each other with construction projects. Everyone in a colonial family had a job to do. The day would begin at sunrise and end with the darkness of night. The man of the household would be the hunter and supplier of the meat, be it deer, bear, fowl, or fish. The wife would be the preparer of what was hunted. There was a cooking, baking of bread, and preserving of meats. There would be a lot of one-pot meals, such as stews and soups. The boys would work with their father in helping with the farming, and when older, go out hunting and would gather firewood needed for cooking. The girls would be learning homemaking from their mother. It was a very hard and difficult life. For scheduling a personal or family tour of the shelter house, call 610-965-9258. Please note the second floor of this historic log cabin is not ADA accessible. Donations are accepted for the preservation of the shelter house.